Well, welcome everybody, and welcome to the Retail Right Now series. Thank you so much for joining me today. By way of introduction, my name is David White. I'm the National Retail Sector Leader for Deloitte here in Australia. I'll be hosting today's session, and to give you a little bit of a background, over the course of this week, the Retail Right Now series will be focusing on the key trends that we're seeing globally, bringing you insights from some of our strategic partners, and really hopefully helping you plan for 2022 and beyond in these challenging, but I think very opportunist times as well. So we have 4 sessions across the course of this week. We have a session from Meta, focusing on the metaverse and what does that mean for retailers and what should people be focusing on in FY22. Google will be joining us later in the week for a discussion around the changing engagement with consumers, with a focus on digital and bringing in some of their global insights to help retailers think around that. And then finally, we have a piece from Salesforce, which they've entitled Expect the Unexpected. So I promise I won't give you anything away in terms of the content, but what I can tell you is they spent a lot of time in the US visiting the NRF Big Show over the last few weeks or so. So got some very interesting insights that they're very keen to share with you, and I'm looking forward to seeing those as well. So back to today's session. We're going to split today's session into 2 parts. The first part, I'm delighted to be joined by Paul Zahra, the CEO of the Australian Retailers Association. We do a lot of work together and are doing some amazing work for retailers here in Australia. We're going to focus on what is going on in the market, what is Paul seeing, and some various insights from him. We're then in the second half of the session going to focus on the 6 key global retail trends that we think you need to be focused on in 2022 and beyond. So we'll split the session into 2. So let's kick off with the start of the session. Firstly, a big welcome to Paul Zahra. I'll give you a little bit of background to Paul if you're not aware who he is. As I say, CEO of the Australian Retailers Association, a leading figure here in Australia of the retail markets, having worked in the industry for more than 35 years as a senior executive and also in some non-executive roles as well. Paul's advised companies and boards on a range of issues and areas, including leadership, disruptive change, digital transformation, and of course, diversity and inclusion. So, Paul, firstly, a big welcome. Thanks ever so much for taking the time out to join us today. We really value the partnership that we have with the ARN. Looking forward to having a chat to you.
Thanks, David. You can see I'm coming live from the Queen Victoria building here in Sydney, and I notice you're in an empty office. So let's talk about that at some point. So all good.
Well, good. Well, I'm trying to get people back into the CBD, Paul. I'm here, so it's all good. That's all good. Look, Paul, let's kick off. It's been an incredibly challenging time, very uncertain time. You know, we're into our 3rd year now of the pandemic and COVID and all the things that brings in terms of challenges. We're seeing geopolitical unrest coming from Europe, and undoubtedly that'll have consequences for us in Australia and clearly on the retail market. So very, very challenging couple of years for retailers. And I think it's fair to say that retailers have been very creative and very resilient in the way in which they've responded to those challenges. But from your perspective, you know, we'd love to hear, how is the industry as a whole faring right now?
Well, look, maybe we should just start with the numbers. I guess the ABS data has just come out today, and January was retail was up 6.4 on the previous year and 17.4 on the year before that. So in fact, it's actually in good shape. In fact, a really strong November. It was a record November month. In fact, it's become a bigger month than December, and we actually traded well through December as well. So it's actually outstanding, but it's been a roller coaster ride. And it'd be fair to say that on top of all of that, of course, it's been an uneven source of gold, I guess, for retailers. It depends what you are selling and where you're located. What we found out, obviously, particularly in the last few months, CBD retailers are particularly still doing it tough. Today's announcement for both Melbourne and Sydney to get out of masks and back to the office has been a call to action. So we'll be watching that space quite closely. But CBDs around the country have been failing. In travel retail, of course, for obvious reasons, have also been doing it really tough. So, there's a bit to play out yet. Overall, the industry's in great health. There's no doubt COVID accelerated trends that were already occurring in the industry. And what we saw was this absolute embracing of digital transformation through that period too, because no longer did retail see digital as being a disruptor. They saw it as an insurance plan. And in fact, many retailers still, particularly in the small to medium-sized business, were caught out by not having a digital strategy. And of course, for them to have survived through the last couple of years, they needed to be digitally able, and we're seeing that now. So we haven't wasted a crisis. I think it's a really resilient sector that keeps reinventing itself. And we've seen certainly a lot of businesses rise to the challenge, have done particularly well, particularly those in household goods have done well because, of course, we've been all staying, playing and working from home.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for that, Paul. That's really useful to understand. And of course, in your role, you speak every day with retailers. You're privileged to some of the challenges and opportunities that they're working on, and obviously helping them in the background as well. Would you mind just sharing with us, the particular challenges that they're facing right now in 2022?
Yeah, so I think there's definitely a move from government now no longer to provide business support, and I think that's the key message for small to medium-sized businesses. They need to now survive in this new post-COVID world, or living with COVID, I guess, and being able to operate. But we've got two big challenges still that we're trying to solve with government. One is staff shortages. So, of course, whilst the borders have come down, we don't see it's not going to be a big snapback to where we were previously. We're still lacking international tourists. We're still lacking skilled migrants. So staff shortages are a major issue. So in a low unemployment world, with staff shortages, that only means one thing, and that means that prices will go up, and that will force labour costs up. Now, that's great for minimum wage earners, not great for businesses that are trying to keep their costs in check. And the other big issue, of course, it's not dissimilar related. It's been disrupted through COVID. There's been supply chain related issues. And there's been a global supply chain disruption that has actually created all sorts of issues. Now, that means that, what we're seeing is that, the supply chain issues are going to continue for another 12 to 18 months. It does require strong inventory management. We've now got some ASX companies coming out and they've bought too much inventory, so that will hurt. So it's about getting it right. And I think that's the tough bit, because it's hard to plan. It's hard to understand where the which part of the curve you're going to be on, the downside or the upside. And there's all these sorts of issues that are adding to supply chain issues that, again, with the container costs going up by something like up to 10 times their usual amount. I think there's, one quote for a container was pre-COVID was $2,000. It's now at $12,000. And that can only, again, mean one thing, and that's prices going up. Now, prices going up, you'll be well versed on this. Prices go up, sales won't necessarily follow. They can come down. So there's a lot to be concerned about or to watch this year.
Of course, this year, Paul, it's also an election year. That means lots of different things to lots of different people. But clearly, it's also very important to retailers. So what does the recovery look like for the retail industry this year? And in particular, what do you think the government can do to support and encourage it?
Well, look, we've put together a really detailed budget submission to the federal government, which is quite extensive. And our focus has been on driving the retail recovery and resilience, because, we know there's about $200 billion sitting on people's personal bank accounts through forced lockdowns. They've not been able to sort of spend that money. So we hope that money will be released. But if confidence is not in check, people will be not spending that money. So we need to make sure that the retail recovery for the industry happens and continues that momentum that we've seen this year, particularly in those pockets that I spoke about, CBD retail particularly being a concern. We're also continuing to drive tax reform, addressing the existing constraints within skilled labour, as I mentioned, investing in supply chain resilience. Again, we're a little probably taken aback, all of us in the industry, on how much we did really rely on the international markets when it came to supply chain. So we need to become a little bit more resilient and be able to manage particularly things that are closer to home in case we have a situation like this again. The other big agenda items for the ARA are the transition to net zero and the circular economy. And also addressing inequalities and accelerating the digital transformation. So we've put in a few suggestions. They include expanding the 25% small business corporate tax rate to cover more SMEs, reintroducing the National Cabinet Mandatory Code of Conduct, and of course, more work in expanding the temporary skill shortage visa program to include those hard to fill retail roles, because we've got some short-term needs that we need to overcome pretty quickly.
Paul, that's a long list of things to do. I know you and the rest of your colleagues at the Australian Retailers Association are working tirelessly on behalf of retailers. So just wanted to say thank you for everything that you're doing. Keep up the great work, and good luck with the rest of the year, and really appreciate you sharing your insights on the retail market today.
Thanks, David. Thank you so much. And also thank you for Deloitte for their strategic partnership with the ARA. It's treasured. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Fantastic. Well, some amazing insights there from Paul. We'll let him go. He's got a lot of things to be getting on with right now. So we'll jump into the second part of today's session. And what I want to do for this next part is take you through the 6 key retail trends that we see are most important to retailers in 2022, and clearly then going through to future periods. We've boiled this down to 6 key trends you can see on the screen. The first is around Gen Z or Gen Z, if you're from my part of the world, and this is not a new trend. This has been happening for a while, but what we have seen over the last 12 months is a big shift in terms of the influence that they can now have on the economy. So I'll take you through some trends that we're seeing there. Secondly, digital, and we just heard Paul talk around the importance of digital transformation to retailers and how it's a lifeline to survival, but also to thrive in the business. And that continues, and it continues to have an ever more encroaching part of a retail strategy. So I'll talk you through what's happening from a digital perspective. Thirdly, speed and convenience. And if anything has come out of COVID, it is that we need to be more agile, and the consumer expects things quicker and in a more convenient manner. So some very interesting trends happening there I'll take you through. Fourthly is around diversification. And what we're seeing is retailers start to think more broadly around what are the opportunities outside of my core traditional business. And particularly from a global perspective, we're really seeing retailers challenge their business model and also leverage some of the skill sets and some of the data pools they developed over the last 12 to 18 months. Trend number 5 is circularity and traceability. The whole focus on net zero and some of the support behind that is clearly very, very important to retailer strategies. But there's also some great opportunities there in terms of revenue growth. So I want to talk you through some ideas and some trends that we're seeing from global retailers. And then last but not least, we've called it distinctive collaboration. And what we see from the best retailers in the world is that they don't always try to do everything themselves. Even if they have the resources, it can take too long. And, there is a very big skill shortage at the moment. So thinking strategically around how you collaborate, but in a genuine way that's unique to your business model, is something that I think is a real win-win market. So I'll take you through some examples of that as well. So let's jump into Gen Z. And like I say, this isn't a new trend. We are all very aware of the changing of the generations, but there are some important points that I want to bring out here. Particularly so is that the fact that they are now forming a major part of the workforce in Australia. And that means that they're also forming a major part of the share of wallet. And so retailers are having to respond and get ahead of the game in terms of how they engage with the Gen Z population, in terms of trends, how they shop, products, and also the way in which they just think and engage with different brands also. And there are a few different areas in which they do that. And I've called out 4 key areas that I see within this new generation coming through and the implications for retailers. And the first is around social commerce. Clearly, social has been an important part of just that, social, of interacting with our friends and families and connecting digitally. But what we've seen, and we're really starting to see accelerate right now, is the use of commerce to drive, the use of social commerce to drive business and to drive revenues. And a great example of this is TikTok, which is now, I think, the most visited platform in the world. And they've teamed up with Shopify recently, so that, not only is it about sharing videos and sharing experiences, it's also about the ability to shop. And they've run campaigns which have attracted over 5 billion clicks through to purchase. And so being relevant to social and understanding that this is where Gen Z focus, not just about sharing stories, but also about buying, is a really, really important aspect and a great growth opportunity for you. Secondly is the in-store experience. And ultimately, retailers will still generate the most of their sales coming through stores, and Gen Z are no different to that. But the experience that they're looking for and the way in which they interact is different, and it is more important as they become a larger share of the wallet here in Australia. And we're seeing retailers start to adapt their physical space. And I've called out a great example from possibly one of my favorite shops in the world, which is Selfridges. Amazing stores if you get to visit them. Very expensive real estate. In Selfridges, they've carved out a specific area now called Playhouse, designed for gaming, to attract that generation through to spend time gaming with their friends online, hanging out, having a coffee, having a drink, then also experiencing the Selfridges brand and experiencing and shopping in the Selfridges store. So redesigning stores to give you that digital new experience, driving people through, I think is really important for this generation. The third area, part of Gen Z, is marketplaces, and this is where Gen Z are shopping. And if you're not on marketplaces, or you don't have a way in which you compete, or you offer in a similar way, you will get left behind. Some of the multiples and some of the amounts being paid for companies with marketplaces, I've given an example there of Depop that sold for $1.6 billion. This is a massive business. So when you see money, amounts of money being traded at that sort of level, you realize this is the place to be. So your strategy has to factor in how this generation are thinking about shopping, and marketplaces are really important. The fourth area I think is really interesting, and is causing changes come through, is inclusivity. And not saying that other generations aren't inclusive, they are, but it's just very prevalent in the way in which I think Gen Z go about shopping and thinking around brands. And I've given the example there of the Fluid Project, which is a gender-neutral clothing company that started 10 years or so ago, maybe a bit more, and was interesting at the time, 4 or 5 years ago, but wasn't mainstream. Now it's mainstream. Now it's in Nordstrom stores in the US, dedicated areas, gender-neutral clothes that people are buying, experiencing, and expect that to expand. So we're seeing these sorts of things that are important to Gen Z suddenly becoming mainstream in the largest retail stores that we shop in. Okay, trend number 2 is digital. And this is really just a ticket to play, but there's huge changes going on in this part of the retail world. And one of them is the metaverse. And I won't spend too long talking about this. What I'd say is dial in to the session being held later in the week by Meta. They'll be exploring what this means for retailers right now, but it is really, really interesting to follow that through. I think the use of technology as 3D networks evolve is really going to have a massive impact. But digital is now across every single part of our business. And I've called out some examples of what some leading retailers are looking at as they bring digital into their strategies from start to finish. You have the likes of Tesco in the UK investing in micro-urban fulfillment stores. So being able to fulfill small amounts of quantities, small amounts of orders in an agile, nimble way that previously would have been quite cost prohibitive. But with new technologies and leveraging what they already have in terms of fulfillment centers, these are now really starting to pop up around the country. Likewise, one of the biggest apparel retailers in the world, Zara, they understand the importance of a same-day delivery for an apparel retailer. They've invested historically in amazing flagship stores that we love to go and visit and shop at. But also the consumer wants to know what's in stock. And if it's in stock, I want it, and I want it today. So they've invested a huge amount in their back office inventory system that's real time and allows you to order and also track your order all the way through to delivery within the same day. And that is the mecca. That is the goal that many retailers are working for. But we're really starting to see that become effective. Then if we take it out of sort of e-commerce fulfillment and start looking at other areas, we have the likes of new digital products coming through. And an example is L'Oreal, who have always invested massively in new technologies and in digital. And we talk around the metaverse, and we talk around the rise of, changing shopping behaviors and gaming and those sorts of things. Well, L'Oreal appreciates that sometimes we don't always go out and wear makeup. And sometimes we have events inside. They've actually developed what they've called virtual cosmetics. So this is something that you can put on with your character when you're gaming or you're online. And it's really blending the two lives, the sort of the digital life and the physical life. And they've clearly seen an opportunity there, which I really love. Likewise, when we look at stores, there's lots of people experimenting with the digital world. Brand Lab effectively is a way in which you can, a way in which you can develop that new physical store environment. You can experiment, you can play around with it. It links back your digital platform through to your physical store. So we're seeing a lot of experimentation come through now, leveraging what people are doing online to then translate that into store. And the list goes on. The investments in digital are amazing, and there's so many different things to be aware of as you're coming up with your strategies and as you're thinking about where you invest. Like I say, I think there's a huge race on by the tech companies to get ahead in the metaverse. We'll hear from Meta later in the week, as I explained. It's across all of the big tech companies. Microsoft is about to roll out the metaverse through to Teams, and it is creating different experiences and different opportunities. Now, we're not quite sure where that's going to go, but what we do know is it is certainly seen by the big tech companies as the next wave, and they're all working on what platform that's going to be based on. But I think keeping close to the metaverse and understanding what the opportunities are for your business is something that's really, really important. We're also seeing the rise of cryptocurrencies in different forms of payments. And I think it's fair to say in Australia, we've always been very advanced in our payment systems. And to be honest with you, I think parts of Europe and parts of the US have been playing catch up to us. But we are now seeing, interestingly, the cryptocurrencies becoming more and more relevant. We're seeing the likes of MasterCard link cryptocurrencies through to loyalty points, and we're seeing retailers really starting to understand crypto a bit more and make it more part of the daily transaction world. So again, understanding what that means for your business, I think, is really, really important. As I mentioned before, the third key trend that we see for 2022 is the speed at which retailers are having to react and deliver and operate to meet up with customer demand. We've all been working from home at different points. We've changed our expectations in terms of when we want things and how. And we're seeing a huge investment in terms of being able to respond to this convenience. We want frictionless shopping. We want to leverage existing partners that we already shop with. So I'd rather shop with one firm or one company with 3 different products than rather go through 3 different ones. So how do you work on partnerships and collaborations to make it work? And that's where retailers are really starting to invest in. So who's doing what? Well, look, I think the supermarkets in particular are very aware of this because it is a fast-moving goods business, and so you have to be on top of it. And it started off with some pretty far-fetched ideas. Everyone will remember Amazon Go, so the store that you can walk in, pick up your products, walk out, takes payment, very, very frictionless, no problem at all. And I remember visiting the first Amazon Go store in the US a few years ago, and don't get me wrong, it was very interesting, but it felt like a novelty. It felt like it was Amazon really pushing the boundaries to try things. And we were all skeptical about where that was going to go. If you roll that forward 3, 4, 5 years, you have all the major supermarkets experimenting with frictionless payments and frictionless shopping. Only just before Christmas, the grocery retailer Sainsbury's launched basically an Amazon Go style shop in the centre of London using Amazon type technologies. So that's absolutely huge, and they're focused on there. And then you'll also see the likes of Tesco and Carrefour focusing on that delivery part. So they've each launched different apps with different supply chains. So Tesco have a big focus on last minute or forgotten goods. So if you've gone back and you've forgotten that bottle of wine or those fruit to go with your pavlova, they have an ordering system that allows you to order within 60 minutes for small items. And likewise, Carrefour have something similar. So you're really starting to see the big supermarkets play around with these digital frictionless technologies, but also then trying to figure out that last mile, trying to make it more convenient for us as the shopper. But we're also seeing a huge disruption in this space. And I've picked up a couple of examples here in Australia. The first, if you're based in New South Wales, you may have come across a company called Milk Run. And that's an app or a service that allows you effectively to order your groceries and get them within 30 or 40 minutes. One of my friends did it last week, and it was 25 minutes. And they are effectively acting as an intermediary between the supermarket and the consumer. So sometimes they will buy from the major supermarkets, other times they'll source product elsewhere. But it's really all around finding a gap in the market and accelerating through to the consumer. We've also seen something similar with Jimmy Brings. If you ever used Jimmy Brings, which is a Woolworths-owned company that's all around bringing liquor, alcohol, soft drinks through to you at your home in a very quick time frame, leveraging their existing liquor stores with a very small delivery fee. So the focus and the ability to make that economical is really, really important, because that is what consumers expect. If I've forgotten something or if I want something within 30 minutes, my expectation is that I can do that. So how is your business model evolving for that? And, you know, the major players are still there. So Uber Eats, and Uber more generally, we've been seeing in Australia a lot of partnerships with Uber. So rather than try and solve this issue on your own, why not think around how do you work with some of these existing providers to be able to figure out that last mile delivery, maybe team up. Why deliver one thing separately? Why not deliver food or clothes or other items all in one go? That's got to be more efficient, and is an interesting proposition for the consumer as well. And it's a trend that we've been seeing overseas. So GoPuff just raised a huge amount of money. I think it was over $2 billion. And they're doing something very, very similar to the companies I just described. So this isn't just happening here. It's not just happening in one region of the world. This is happening globally and causing huge disruption. And I think the third element to convenience is virtual. And fair to say in the health system, you know, this is something that they've been years ahead of compared to retail. The ability to virtually visit your GP and have a session and be diagnosed is something that's been in place for some time. And it's something that's becoming more and more popular. In the retail space, we saw in China during sort of the first outbreak of COVID, we had dedicated stores set up with retail assistants, and you could effectively shop with them live using your smartphone or your tablet. We're seeing companies like Accent Group in Australia do something similar. So really trying to blend that physical and virtual world to get the best of both worlds. And I think these are sorts of things that we're going to see more and more as the metaverse expands, as 3D tools become more of an option, and the ability to use those tools to be able to walk through stores, to have virtual personal shoppers. I think it just opens up the possibility and again adds to the convenience, because sometimes we don't have time or the inclination to go to store, but we want that store experience. And I think that's really where that comes in. The fourth key area I'm going to talk around is diversification. And one of the risks that we see with companies and retailers and other companies alike is you can get too focused on your existing traditional business and miss trends and opportunities. And over the last 18 months, the level of M&A activity globally, but also here in Australia, has gone skyrocketing. And there have been huge opportunities for retailers and consumer product companies to look at diversification through acquisition, through mergers, through buying brands or businesses or physical store footprints. And we expect that to continue. We expect more disruption and we expect opportunities. But we're also seeing investments in very different areas. Those areas might be adjacencies. They might be completely new areas. But it's certainly an interesting way in which retailers are challenging their existing business model and how they make money in the future. And there are a number of different ways in which we're seeing retailers approach this. I'll call out a couple of examples that I've pulled out on this slide. The first is if you look at a company like Walmart that's developed an amazing internal digital platform with the ability to analyze and predict. Now, they've been using that in their own business to be able to figure out supply needs and demand needs. What they're now doing is selling effectively that IP that they've developed, and they're selling that to other businesses to help them figure out their own demand and supply patterns. And so they're becoming a B2B seller, a software company through the assets that they've created in-house. And there's a really interesting alternative revenue stream. You know, we've seen the same thing happen in the US with Best Buy, which is effectively the equivalent of JB Hi-Fi here in Australia. You know, they've been incredibly effective in the way in which they target advertising. They've got an amazing customer database and analytics tools. And they use that to target their own advertising to generate an increase in sales and basket size. But again, they've said, well, we've created this digital asset. Why just keep it to ourselves? Why can't we sell that? Why can't we make money from that? And again, they've developed their own advertising and marketing business aimed to help other retailers and other businesses be successful as they are in this space. So I love those two examples. I think they're great adjacencies and shows how the payback from digital investment isn't just through their own sales, it's through new channels. But we're also seeing diversity in other areas. If you take an example of somebody like a John Lewis. Now, John Lewis have been closing stores over the last 12 months, and that's creating sort of empty opportunities for real estate. Effectively, they've gone into sort of the construction business almost, or the property development business. So on those sites, they're planning to build over 10,000 homes, which again is a very, very different business model and a different way of thinking to John Lewis was 5 years ago. So who knows where that will go and what they can do with that. But if you have an asset, in this case, a physical asset, it creates an opportunity. Then maybe a slight adjacency to this whole thing is an example I wanted to call out from Ikea. Now, Ikea, from a sustainability perspective, has been one of the leading global retailers in recycling, reusable, looking at materials, and trying to get their impact to net zero. That's meant a lot of focus and a lot of investment in this space in order to generate sales and hold on to customers. But it's also got them interested in other parts of this issue. And they're starting to invest in things like hydrogen fuel, not just for their business, but as a future revenue stream, because they see the opportunity in sustainability in their own business. So why not invest in it and take opportunities elsewhere? So again, I think it's really interesting when you're thinking about your strategy and what your focus is. If you're particularly good at something or you've developed an asset, how can you monetize that? And if there's something that you're working on that's creating IP, is there an adjacency that potentially you could invest in? And I think, you know, we're seeing some great examples come out of global for this. My fifth key retail trend is circularity and traceability. And, you know, never has sustainability been so important as it is today. I think I've had many conversations with retailers over the years around sustainability and the importance of, you know, minimizing the carbon footprint. But I would say until the last 12 months or so, it's been very hard to monetize and actually, you know, strategize and think about what does that mean in terms of my revenue streams and my margins. And before it was a little bit of a nice to have. Now I think we're in a space where it's a must have. It's a must have both in terms of the impact it has financially on your business, but also I think from a customer engagement and employee engagement, having a business that's sustainable is critical to any strategy. And, we're working with a lot of retailers here in Australia about developing this out, and there's no one right path. But I would say that all of the key decisions that we see being made by major retailers, sustainability is a factor in each one. And why not? And we have the technologies to do this, and we are seeing some really interesting stuff. And as consumers, we want to be able to shop and feel good about ourselves. The areas like fast fashion, apparel, footwear, we go through a lot of items every year, and people are starting to realize just what that means. So the likes of, you can see here, Converse, they have introduced a free service that allows you to clean, repair, and also customize your Converse boot at the same time. So encouraging you to come into the store and participate. And you might say, well, that's just going to cannibalize existing sales. But I think it's a way of bringing the customer back into the store. I think it's a way of showing how valuable the Converse product is. And I think it's the way of the future. And I think, business models need to adapt to the fact that maybe we won't buy as many shoes, or we won't buy as many shirts every year. And so how do you make sure you maintain with that trend? We've seen the same thing with the likes of Timberland, who now have created a shoe that effectively, when you return it, every single part of that shoe can be recyclable. So, we're seeing a real change in the materials used for particular products. And this is transcending through various different means, lots and lots of different areas. I think the first thing that we're seeing is supply chain, and the need and the importance of having visibility in how things are made, how they're transported, what level of energy or output or carbon footprint is that generating, all the way through to being sold. And so you have companies, and I give an example there, of using RFIDs to track these products all the way through the supply chain. RFIDs have come down a lot in price over the last few years. And I still think, whilst they're old technologies, they're 20 years old or something, they've still got a lot of uses. We're finding new ways to do them. So transparency in supply chain is something I think is really, really important. And we're seeing companies like Borken and others use this to market themselves to customers. So they're able to track exactly their carbon footprint, where they source from, what the environmental impact of that is, and that's being used as a marketing tool to be able to sell. We're seeing a big increase in some of these sustainable fashion brands coming through the market. We're also seeing the demand for recyclable materials increase massively. And if I take an example in the luxury space, it wouldn't have been that long ago that the likes of LVMH or Gucci were investing in places like crocodile farms here in Australia, because crocodile skin is used in handbags and boots and those sorts of things. And what we're actually seeing now is those luxury retail companies investing in sustainable products instead, because they see that's where the future is. And that's where people are prepared to pay a premium, not just for those leather goods, but actually people are prepared to pay a premium for recyclable products and recyclable materials, which is a really, really interesting shift that we've seen come through. Just linked to that, and I talked around it a little bit in terms of the technology, but this idea of circularity and the ability to recycle products is becoming more and more important. And non-fungible tokens, or NFTs, are really combining to be able to give full visibility on the origins of the product, where it was made, when it was made, where it's been bought and sold. And in particular, we're seeing a lot of opportunities in the luxury space where the demand for secondhand luxury products has skyrocketed. I think Selfridges has a dedicated area where you can rent 40 plus different luxury retail branded products. And so the ability to rent or the ability to sell secondhand is really, really taking off. And NFTs are creating that visibility for retailers to know the level of authenticity of that product, which is so important to give consumer confidence when you're trading in the secondhand market. So sustainability, I'd just say that's got to be part and parcel of all of your strategy. My sixth and final key trend I've called distinctive collaboration. One of the key things, and we work with a lot of major retailers around the world, one of the key things that we found, notwithstanding the fact that they have significant resources available to them, is that the most successful retailers don't go it alone. They work with other retailers, they work with technology providers, they work with adjacent companies, because you don't always need that expertise in-house. We know there's a shortage of labor at the moment, and there's a clear skill shortage, particularly in that digital space. So we see the major retailers working on collaborative strategic partnerships to be able to accelerate growth opportunities. And I would say a big part of that is also making sure that those collaborations, because you're taking your brand and you're taking your company, you're teaming up with another company, that has to be bang on your own values and what you stand for and what you're looking to do. And that's why societal issues and being authentic and purposeful is critical when you're looking at collaborating with other parties. So who's doing what? Well, there's a whole bunch of different companies out there doing some really cool things. I'll run through a couple of examples that you can see on screen. The one that I really, really like that I'll start with is Waitrose. So sort of a higher end supermarket in the UK. In many respects, during COVID, they've been disrupted by the online ordering platforms, the takeaway platforms. People haven't been shopping in store for some of their sort of, I guess, ready to eat meals when you can get them from takeaway. And interestingly, what they did was, we'll take that head on and say, well, actually, rather than try and compete with some of these companies, why don't we work with them? Why don't we come up and create something together? So they teamed up with one of the companies called the Mindful Chef, and they created recipes all based on ingredients from Waitrose. And so when you order particular meals from the Mindful Chef, the products and the design and the ingredients, everything's from Waitrose. It's branded Waitrose and Mindful Chef. So you're still reaching out, you're still giving that amazing food offering that you're getting from Waitrose, but you're leveraging some of the competitors that you're in theory working against. And I think that's a great example of frenemies, working with people where you do have a gap in the market to be able to capitalize and work together. We've also seen collaboration in many different forms. But I'd say a key theme is finding a partner which shares the same values and offers the same vision to your customers and to your employees. And so, for example, if you look at Balmain, a lot of increasing sales from their trainers coming through, people visiting the gym, but the importance of having products that you can try on virtually and see physically is massively important. And so they've managed to blend the two by teaming up with third parties to be able to visualize and create that. Very, very unique offering they've got if you want to jump on and have a look. Likewise, authenticity, Burberry, they've really focused in on one particular area, which is driving literacy with one of their key brand ambassadors, Marcus Rashford, a famous sports person in the UK that famously suffered from literacy issues when he was younger. And look how successful he is today. So they've picked up on that theme. They've picked up how that resonates with the customer, and they've really invested and leveraged that for the right reasons, obviously, as well. And we're seeing that across all different brands there. You can see a similar example with Haagen-Dazs. And so I think this is a really interesting one. So as you're thinking about your strategy, as you're thinking about what do my values stand for, who can I partner with and who can I collaborate with that reinforces to the customer and reinforces to my employees, my values, and how do I leverage that in the market? And this theme of collaboration is not just individual retailers. What we're seeing now is groups of retailers in different countries get together to drive change. An amazing example is the BRC, the British Retail Consortium. I know the ARA work very closely with them. They've really picked up on this climate change theme. And all of the major retailers in the UK have collaborated together, working with the BRC to create a consortium and created a roadmap, not just for one retailer to develop, the right path through for climate change, but for them all to follow. And I think that's just way more powerful. So the ability to collaborate, using the BRC or the ARA or whoever it might be, I think that's a real opportunity to drive change in this area, and ultimately all boats rise. We've seen that in lots and lots of different areas. We've seen particularly, we've also seen luxury retailers get together and do something similar in that environment, and sort to really own the issue and work together collaboratively. And the likes of Amazon have done exactly the same thing. So again, I think this idea of working collectively as a group rather than individually is something we're going to see a lot more of. And I wish I had Paul Zahra on the call still to talk around some of the stuff he's doing here. But again, I think the ARA will play a critical role here in Australia, helping to drive that change. So look, they're the 6 major retail trends that we see impacting in 2022. There's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack. My advice to you would be have a think about some of the things that I've spoken around. Some will be more important to you than others right now. But have a think about what that is. Have a think about your existing business model and think about where you might want to invest. And particularly, I would then say, as you're developing your strategies in all parts of your business, bring in those themes that it's not just one sector or one department within your business that's thinking about it. You're looking at it from a holistic perspective. Talk about what we've got planned for the rest of the week on the Retail Right Now series. Tomorrow we have Meta, as I mentioned before. They've very recently renamed themselves, as you know, from Facebook to Meta, because Metaverse is seen as the big growth opportunity globally. We'll have Meta talking around what that means for retailers right now, and what are the opportunities and how is that going to evolve over the next 12, 18, 24 months or so. And we also have Kate Blythe from Mecca, the Chief Marketing Officer, joining that session. So really, if you haven't already, make sure you've jumped online and subscribed to that one. And then, as I mentioned, we have 2 other sessions running this week. We have a session from Google. Google will be talking around the importance of digitization and engaging with the customer. Who else but Google knows about that? So that session's coming later on. And then we also have Salesforce. They have spent a considerable amount of time looking at the key trends. I mentioned before, they've been over in New York, attending the big show in the NRF, and they've also been doing various store tours. So Salesforce will be talking around some of those key trends. What are the new technologies being used in and outside stores? And what are some of the things that you can think about as you drive forwards and manage that shift, hopefully back into the physical environment over the next few months or so. Well, thank you ever so much for joining today. I hope you found that useful. Look forward to you joining the sessions that we have planned for the rest of the week. But best of luck out there. Take care, and hopefully we'll speak to you very shortly. Thank you very much for attending.